Hi there. In this video, we're going to talk about a special technique of factoring called factoring by grouping. And so what we're going to do is we are going to be looking at polynomials consisting of four terms, like this one, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we're going to group the terms. The first two we're going to group, and the second two we're going to group. And we're going to factor those individually, and that'll be the first step. And the next step will be to factor one more time, and we'll be done. And that's factoring by grouping. Okay, so let's give this a whirl. We're going to, like I said, group these first two terms together. There they are. And I want to just ignore the rest and just factor this. So I'm looking for the GCF here. What's the greatest common factor of these two terms? Well, the number part, this one has a coefficient of 1, this has 7, so the GCF is just 1 for the number part, but then we have an x part. We have an x squared here and an x. The largest power of x that these are both divisible by is just x. So the GCF for these two is x. Now if I factor out the x, what do I have? In other words, what do I multiply x by to get x squared? Well, it's x. What do I multiply x by to get 7x? Well, 7. So there we go. I've factored out the first group. Now let's do the second group. So the number part. What's the greatest common factor of these numbers? Well, this one is divisible by 8, and this is also divisible by 8. And that's the largest thing I can get. So 8 is the GCF here. And notice that this has an x in it and this one doesn't. So I cannot include any x's in the GCF. This piece is not divisible by x. So that's my GCF. That's what I'm going to factor out. What do I multiply 8x by to, what do I multiply 8 by to get 8x? Just x. What do I multiply 8 by to get 56? It's 7. Now notice here that this was a plus 8. That's what I would get if I had put a plus sign over here. Right? If I were to multiply this all out, and you should do that as you go along these problems, multiply it back out and just make sure you get back to this. That's a good check to make sure you did this right. All right? And that makes sure that you got the signs right, especially. We'll see in future problems, checking these signs will be an important thing to do. Okay, so that was the first step in factoring. Now we're going to factor again. So now I look at this expression here, and I ask myself, well, what is the GCF between this guy here and this second guy here? Well, I see that the GCF is just x plus 7. So that's what I'm going to factor out. They both have an x plus 7 in them. So what do I multiply x plus 7 by to get this term? Well, it's only missing the x, right? So that's what goes here. And what do I multiply the x plus 7 by to get this term here? Well, I got to multiply it by 8. And so there we go. This is the factored form. Now, I want you to notice something. If I were to distribute the x plus 7, if I were to distribute it through and multiply it, I would get this line right here. And that's a really good check for you to do. Make sure that when you multiply it back out, as we said before, you get to the previous step in the factoring. It's a really good way to check to make sure you're on the right track. All right, next up we have this factoring by grouping problem. Now in this one we're going to have to be a little bit more careful about minus signs here. Let me adjust the screen, it's a little off center. Okay, so we've got some minus signs. We're going to have to be a little bit careful here. But we're going to go through this problem exactly the same way. So I'm going to group these two terms, and I'm going to ask myself, well, what is the GCF here? Well, the GCF is, let's see, between the numbers, well, there's just the number 1 here, so the GCF is going to be 1 times, well, this is an x cubed, this is an x squared, so the largest power of x is x squared, so 1 times x squared. So I'm going to factor that out. What do I multiply x squared by to get x cubed? Well, x. What do I multiply x squared by to get the 9x squared? Well, 9. So this is the factored form of that first group. Now let's factor the second group. Now, the trick is, if you ever see a minus sign here, you're going to write that same minus sign here. All right? Now I'm going to ask myself, what's the GCF of 6 and 54? Well, the answer there is 6. 6 is divisible by 6, and 54 is divisible by 6. And that's the largest thing they're both divisible by. So now I'm going to write in here, what do I multiply negative 6 by to get negative 6x? Well, I just need an x. Right? If I multiply these, I get this. Now, what do I multiply negative 6 by to get positive 54? Now, think about what I just said. Negative 6, I want to multiply it by something and get a plus 54. So the answer wouldn't be positive 9, wouldn't be plus 9, because negative 6 times positive 9 would give me negative 54. I actually need a negative 9 here. Notice how we have to be careful with the signs. Because this was negative, I also need this to be negative so that this ends up being positive when I multiply it out. And that's where we have to be careful. Okay, but we did that. We were careful. We got this. So now we go to the next step. I look at this expression here and I say, well, what's the GCF now? Well, they both have an x minus 9 in common. That's the GCF. So I'm going to factor out x minus 9. What do I multiply x minus 9 by to get this first term? Well, the x squared. What do I multiply the x minus 9 by to get this second term? Well, I need the 6. And if I were to distribute this out, you'll see that this would become this. It's a good check.